According to the book Genesis of the New Age by John B. Life, the story begins in 1572 when 500 Germans, including some Prussians and Bavarians, were hired as soldiers, mercenaries, by the King of Portugal, Sebastian I, to build a fort and man a garrison up the Amazon River in a fight against the Spaniards. As they sailed the river, they were fiercely attacked by the native Indians, and both the Germans and Portuguese families were forced to flee to the jungles, where they came across a cave entrance which the Indians feared and fled from. The new colonists made their home in and around the cave and eventually travelled further inward and downwards into the cavern's passages, ultimately leading to the Earth's inner core, which they reached in 1647. Along the way they settled various caverns and established 6 cities and fought off mysterious cavern creatures. The caverns and cities were connected by a crude wooden track system. By 1977, over 350,000 Germans occupied the Inner Earth tunnel settlements, which spanned from Brazil to Australia. In 1647, under Australasia, upon entering the new caverns, the new Germans met with the Atlanteans and the 30,000-year-old Bodlanders, who were the ancient ancestors of the modern Germans. The Bods were extremely advanced, both spiritually and technologically, and decided to take their outer Earth cousins under their wing, and they became known as the 6 Kingdoms of Saxony. In the early 1700s, communication began between the inner and outer Germanies via a secret student exchange program which oriented each to the other's doings. But it wasn't until 1853 that concrete steps were taken towards deeper ties between the two Germanies. Engineers from both sides were engaged to shorten and improve the transportation tunnel systems with electric cars. The technological improvements helped to boost the underground German population to about 10 million by 1900. During World War I, Americans became aware of a route from outer Germany to the Antarctic, but were not sure where it ultimately led to. By 1930, some actual trade began with the two Germanies, and by 1936, Hitler had gathered enough evidence about the inner world to send an aviation team to explore it. The Bodlanders expected and received them, and their king later returned the visit. The King of Bodland warned Hitler and their generals of their misguided war plans, but the Third Reich went ahead anyways. In 1938, German specialists ordered by Hitler penetrated the South Pole opening by air and landed in the interior, making contact with their inner Earth brethren, who received them joyfully. Land was granted to them for the future settlement on the condition that they would relinquish their warlike ways and live under ways of the inner Earthers. Hitler didn't like this, but accepted. In 1943, after his efforts started floundering, a 30-year treaty was signed between Hitler's Germany and the powerful Bodlanders, who would oversee the influx and reorientation of the outer Germans coming into the new inner Earth Germany. By 1944, heavy construction was underway near Bodland to receive many war-torn Germans, most of whom used the Brazil train corridor to reach their new home. Scientists and other specialists in need used a quicker round wing plane through Antarctica to reach their new home. Hitler escaped to Argentina by submarine and then onto the King of Bodland's personal spaceship to the inner Earth capital. Hitler was accepted because he showed promise of rehabilitation. A fake double replaced Hitler from October 1944 onwards. By the end of World War II, some 2.5 million outer Germans settled in the new inner Earth Germany, and the influx continued thereafter. The Americans caught on to the Germans' activities and sent their own expeditions to the inner earth in the person of Admiral E. Byrd, 1946 to 1947, who led the way in a Falcon round-wing aircraft. Byrd's small 60-man army foolishly attacked the inner earthers, who promptly overwhelmed them and sent them back to their homelands. Russia, upon hearing of the American expedition, sent its own armada of 100 planes in 1947, but met a similar fate. In 1948, a much better prepared single-craft expedition by the US followed, which successfully mapped and photographed the Earth's interior and had unique contacts with various races and crafts. Even pictures of dinosaurs and close-ups of the Earth's man-made inner sun were obtained, but of course the results were kept classified. Because of the superiority of the New Germany and the inner earthers in general, the post-World War II Allied nations built bases on and around the polar areas as a means of study and as early defence warnings should these inner earth nations decide to take over the outer earth. In 1965, NASA did a complete detailed mapping of the interior of our planet, and in 1979 they confirmed that 5 continents, 3 large and 2 small, existed in the inner earth. There are also 7 oceans. Agartha, the largest continent, is 3 times the size of North America and populated mostly by Atlanteans, who came from Venus 33,000 years ago. Bodland, another continent, is populated by 36 million Bodlanders. By 1984, over 500 million people inhabited the inner Earth surface, 60 million of which were Germans. 18 million lived in the New Germany and 1.5 million in the New Berlin. The New Berlin has all the conveniences of a modern city, except they are non-polluting. A reformed Hitler remained president of the New Germany until his death on November 12th of 1974, Dr. Hans Terfersen continuing in his footsteps. The round-winged plane powered by Earth's electromagnetic field was the key to military and technological superiority. Its anti-magnetic motor propelled it at speeds of 30,000 miles an hour in any direction, and its weightlifting capabilities were unlimited. It also had a laser offense and laser defense system. The round-winged plane is the prototype of the flying saucer. In 1975, its hull or metal construction was so perfected that it could travel unarmed into space. The USS Enterprise ship on Star Trek uses the round-wing concept. In 1977, US General Edward D. Wright visits New Germany in a round-wing aircraft, and a US delegation exists in New Berlin ever since. Since the 1960s, the Allied outer and inner Earth forces have been monitoring and patrolling Earth's skies and lands. The US has legal diplomatic relations with other planets in our solar system, particularly Venus, Mars and Pluto. The book stops in 1980, the year of its publication. Since then much has happened. Since the fall of communism and the reunification of 2 Germanys, it would be nice to get the author's latest input, if possible. I think we can all agree that Christopher Columbus was a very clever, brave man. In 1492, he was entrusted with the lives of 87 men and 3 boats when he set off across the Atlantic Ocean in search of a fast route to East Asia and the South Pacific. He landed in a place that was unknown to him. There he found treasures, extraordinary trees, birds and gold. He was then entrusted to go back a second time, and this time he took 15,000 colonists on 17 ships. So this was a man of sane mind and someone very trusting and clever. But there was one thing Christopher Columbus was expecting to find, but didn't. Upon his return, in his official report, Christopher Columbus noted that he had discovered a great many islands inhabited by people without number. He praised the natural wonders of the islands. But he added, "I have not found any monstrous men in these lands, as many had thought." Why, one might ask, had he expected to find monsters? In my research, and that of other historians, revealed that Christopher Columbus' views were far from abnormal. For centuries, European intellectuals had imagined a world beyond their borders populated by monstrous races. One of the earliest accounts of these non-human beings was written by the Roman natural historian Pliny the Elder in 77 AD. He told his readers about dog-headed people and creatures with no mouth and no need to eat. Across medieval Europe, tales of marvellous inhuman creatures circulated in manuscripts. Though there were many skeptics, most Europeans believed that the distant lands would be populated by these monsters, and stories of monsters travelled far beyond the libraries of elite readers. Perhaps no one did more to spread the news of monsters than a 14th century English knight named John Mandeville, who, in his account of his travels to faraway islands, claims to have seen people with ears of an elephant. One group of creatures had flat faces with 2 holes, and another that had a head of a man and the body of a goat. Scholars debate whether Mandeville could have ventured far enough to see the places that he described, and whether he was a real person, but his book was copied time and time again, and likely translated into every known European language. Leonardo da Vinci had a copy, and so did Columbus. The old beliefs die hard. Even though Columbus didn't see any monsters, his report wasn't enough to dislodge the ideas of the creatures Europeans expected to find in parts of unknown places. In 1493, around the time Columbus' first report began to circulate, printers of the Nuremberg Chronicle, a massive volume of history, included images and descriptions of monsters, and soon after the explorer's return, an Italian poet offered a verse translation describing Columbus's journey, which its printer illustrated with monsters. Indeed, the belief that monsters had lived on Earth's edge remained for generations. In the 1590s, the English explorer Sir Walter Raleigh told readers about the American monsters he heard about in his travels to Guinea, some of which had their eyes in their shoulders. Even though Christopher Columbus didn't see any monsters on his journey, it was only a matter of a couple of years later, in 1521, during the Spanish and Aztec War.
Cuauhtemoc's last-ditch effort to push back the Spaniards was to elect a sacred Quetzal warrior. Placed in a ceremonial costume covered with resplendent feathers and made to look massive by way of wooden frames, this warrior scared the Spaniards.
The Spanish campaign declared victorious on August 13, 1521, when a coalition army of Spanish forces and natives, led by Herman Cortés, captured the capital of the Aztec Empire.
Pushing through, this warrior is said to have captured 3 men at once and dragged them to Cuauhtemoc for immediate sacrifice. The Spaniards began to withdraw, and Mexica morale increased as the Quetzal pushed further.
Do you really think this was a man? The description matches what we know the Anunnaki look like. So was they trying to recreate the Anunnaki warriors, or was this a real Anunnaki warrior? And where did he disappear to? Why couldn't they find the body?
But this final act of valor could not turn the tide of the siege. As reported by native sources, the warrior dropped from a terrace, never to be seen again.
Nobility never came from chivalry. It came from being tough and ruthless. Real power is not found running off to war. Real power lies in understanding who it it is you're truly fighting. And how they can be defeated.
From Atlantis to Lemuria, it is said that from these two continents, serpent people sold ancient knowledge that will help the race of men in its search for spiritual enlightenment. The thing that has to be pointed out is that profound investigation of different ancient civilizations and cultures has proven that the Shining Ones are a global phenomena. It is also understood that this term or code name was given to some intelligent creatures that were present all over the world and came to the surface in different periods of history. The figurine of the goddess Ninhursag from Sumeria and repetition of these names is astonishing. When we see them for the first time, they appear in all cultures, although this was sometimes hidden because of wrong translation or because of some hidden agenda. The Anunnaki gods of Sumeria and Babylon, and the gods from Egypt, the American and European mythical gods also. At first glance they are different, but if we translate all these names, they all mean one thing only, and that is the Shining Ones, or some other form of this word. Elohim are also Shining Ones. Mages in the Bible are all from the land of sunrise, and in the east they are shamans, or the Shining Ones. There is understanding in all religions, coming from priests, pastors, rabbis and witches, that the Shining Ones existed all the time followers of the religions knew of them, even though the Shining Ones acted secluded. One thing we don't know is their intentions, or the fact was they working for right or wrong on the planet. These people were seen as gods. They were adepts, also known by the name of serpents or snake people. This is because of the outspread of snakes or snake symbolism all over the world. Today we know about different reptiles or serpent cults, which are spread in the cultures all over the world, had its origin in the knowledge and wisdom of the Shining Ones. Serpent people were called this because of their usage of snakes for healing and researching for higher states of consciousness. This is because the serpentine shape of the snake could be used as a universal symbol which described hidden processes linked with the body. When scientists that were studying the shamans in the Amazon noticed that these shamans, in the moments of their trance, often saw shining big snakes that talked with them. If they asked them, these snakes would give them deep knowledge. Other scientists that were exploring wide distribution of serpent mythology found that they were called differently in different parts of the world. We can name only a few of them, like the Nagas of India, Quetzalcoatl in Mexico, Djedje in Egypt, the Adders in Britain, or Lung in China. They are mostly all known by one name, Serpents of Wisdom, and they were connected through networks of spiritual adepts all over the land. These adepts were also known under the name of Soul of the Great White Brotherhood. They say that this race of man first appeared in Polar Land. This cold area was on the two major continents which existed in Western Atlantic and Eastern Pacific today, known as Atlantis and Lemuria. Atlantis was, they say, mostly materialistic culture, while Lemuria was spiritualistic. They were an example of the duality that naturally exists in human consciousness and creations. Looking on the world today, this can explain the why Western world is so materialistic, while Eastern is mainly spiritual. It is again said that from these two continents, serpent people sold ancient knowledge that will help the race of men in its search for spiritual enlightenment. When their continents started to sink to the bottom of the sea, serpents of wisdom grouped their ancient knowledge and migrated into different parts of the globe. They were greeted by their indigenous people as serpent prophets. Under their leadership, many of the dragon cultures arose. These cultures built gigantic pyramids, serpent motifs, and they were governed by the dragon kings. These cultures of dragons continued to exist for many thousands of years. Starting from 2000 years ago, serpents of wisdom and their dragon cultures founded enemies in the form of Christian churches, leaders of the new Christian religion condemned old serpent wisdom as heretical and started the initiative to run it out entirely. However, even before this very successful campaign, most of the serpent people kept a low profile in order to keep the ancient knowledge. Later they appeared again and started taking over different religious institutions like Islam, Templars, Freemasons and Rosicrucians. They kept the flame of the serpent wisdom living, while inspiring and organising revolutions. About 3,000 years ago, the biblical Solomon, a king of Israel and son of King David, was renowned for his wisdom, power, and his personal fortune. Ancient sources tell King Solomon's wealth was one of the largest in the world. Galleys used to arrive off the coast of Palestine, loaded with fabulous treasures for his legendary king. Most precious to King Solomon was gold, and according to the Old Testament, King Solomon was in possession of tons of gold. His drinking cups were made of gold, and he had 300 golden shields. His great throne in Jerusalem was ivory overlaid with the best gold, and on steps leading up to it stood 12 golden lions facing 12 golden eagles. The walls of the temple he built to house the ark were adorned with it too. But where did all this wealth come from? In the Bible it is written that Solomon's servants travelled to Ophir and fetched from hence gold 420 talents, roughly 20 tons. But that is where the clues stop and the trail goes cold. The location of Ophir, it seems, was meant to remain a mystery, and the true location of the legendary Ophir has never been established. Out of this mystery grew a tale that obsessed the Greeks, Renaissance adventurers and Victorian explorers. The search for King Solomon's mines is as timeless as that for the Holy Grail. The astronomer and geographer Ptolemy calculated that Ophir was located in what today is Pakistan, at the mouth of the Indus River. A Portuguese explorer of the 15th century claimed it was in Zimbabwe in Africa, a link embraced by the English poet John Milton in his epic poem Paradise Lost. Christopher Columbus believed he had found Ophir in Haiti, and Sir Walter Raleigh in the jungles of Suriname. In 1568, a Spanish captain discovered a group of islands in the Pacific and named them the Solomon Islands because he believed they were Ophir. Just over a century ago, the Victorians were captivated by a tale of British grit, ancient curses, African warriors and black magic, all suffused with the glamour of diamonds and gold. Despite all attempts, no one has been able to locate the mines of King Solomon, and the mysterious land of Ophir remain as elusive as ever. King Solomon's temple represents the temple of humanity, knowledge and improvement. It's the path to the divine in the tradition of Freemasonry. This temple is a link to early Christian Kabbalah and Hermetic thought. Many believe that philosophy becomes directly linked to the past, present and future of Freemasonry and to the King Solomon's temple. There is nothing left today of the once magnificent building because the Babylonians destroyed it completely in 586 BC. King Solomon was also in possession of a magical shamir that could cut through any stone. Did King Solomon have access to sophisticated ancient technology? What kind of device was able to cut through or disintegrate stone, iron and diamond thousands of years ago? According to a very interesting legend found in the Talmudic literature, King Solomon built his magnificent temple in Jerusalem with the help of a magical worm named Shamir. The Shamir was without doubt an extraordinary object, as it possessed the ability to alter stone, iron and diamond by its mere gaze. According to the story, King Solomon learned from the demon Eshmende that the worm had been entrusted to the care of the Prince of the Sea. Solomon's servants set out to find it and succeeded in delivering it safely to King Solomon. The most puzzling part of this story is that no one really knows what the shamir was. According to the legend, the material to be worked, whether stone, wood or metal, was affected by being shown to the shamir. Some scholars have suggested that the shamir was almost a living being. Other early sources describe it as a green stone. It is said that the shamir was always wrapped in wool and stored in a container made of lead, since any other vessel would burst and disintegrate under its gaze. Based on this description, some scholars have concluded that the shamir's true nature was radioactive, and that it was in fact a small sample of naturally occurring radioactive isotope, possibly radium. In the Book of Kings it is written, "For the house, while it was in the building, was built of stone made ready at the quarry, and there was neither hammer, nor axe, nor any tool of iron heard in the house while it was being built." The Midrash tells us the stones moved on their own accord. They flew and rose up by themselves, setting themselves in the wall of the temple and erecting it. This sounds like ancient people mastered levitation. The shamir was said to have been either lost or had lost its potency by the time of the destruction of the first temple at the hands of Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BC. King Solomon also had in his possession a magnificent ancient flying airship. Ancient myths and legends of sacred texts tell of a number of historical figures who were in possession of flying chariots or flying airships, and one of them was King Solomon. King Solomon was, according to ancient scripts, not only a very wise man, but he also had access to remarkably high, sophisticated technology. As we mentioned, King Solomon possessed a stone known as the magical shamir, and this strange object could cut through any stone. King Solomon was considered a wise man, but he could also be very cruel. One example of this cruelness was his reasoning when he dealt with the settling of a maternity dispute between two women. His solution was to cut the child in half. The real mother prevented the execution by giving up her claim. We are left to wonder if Solomon would have done it. And the king said, "Bring me a sword." So a sword was brought before the king. And the king said, "Divide the living child in two, and give half to one and half to the other." In Kings 3:16, he built a place for Moloch. The cult of Moloch was associated with child sacrifice, and so he did for all his foreign wives, who burned incense and sacrificed to their gods. Kings 11:7. Ancient scriptures reveal that the great Hebrew king was the owner of a marvellous ancient airship. King Solomon would visit Mikenda and his son by flying in a heavenly car. The king, and all who obeyed his word, flew on the wagon without pain and suffering, and without sweat or exhaustion, and travelled in one day a distance which took 3 months to traverse on foot. Throughout the Middle East, as far as Kashmir, are the mountains known as the Thrones of Solomon, including one in northwestern Iran, a flat-topped mountain called the Throne of Solomon. It looks like they could have been landing bases for Solomon's airship. It is fair to say that King Solomon's temple, enormous riches and incredible ancient high-tech devices still remain shrouded in a veil of mystery. Today we're going to be speaking about the ancient city of Dvarika. This legendary ancient city is said to have been founded by Sri Krishna and is considered an extremely important historical landmark in the Mahabharata. Dvarika is considered one of the 4 sacred pilgrimage sites of Hinduism. The ancient city is mentioned in a number of ancient texts, including the Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita, the Harivamsha, as well as the Skanda Purana and the Vishnu Purana. Ancient Sanskrit literature explains how Lord Krishna, the 8th avatar of Vishnu, created the legendary city. The kingdom, suggests Hindu mythology, was constantly attacked 17 times in total. The city was extremely well protected and could only be reached by boat. The city was also extremely well planned, divided into 6 sectors, which in turn divided into residential commercial areas. The city was home to beautiful large roads, incredible decorated plazas, gardens and artificial lakes, and more than 800 palaces made of gold and precious stones. The legendary city of Dvarika is also the place where a mighty aerial battle took place. If we take a look at what ancient Hindu texts tell us, a king named Salva attacked Lord Krishna in the legendary city of Dvarika. The description of the event are extremely interesting, and ancient astronaut theories suggest the descriptions of the battle hint at the possibility that some sort of advanced technology was used, even possibly flying crafts or spacecraft. Lord Krishna struck Salva with 16 arrows, and with showers of arrows he overpowered the airplane, just as the sun in a clear sky overpowers the whole sky by an ultimate number of molecules of sunshine. According to the epic Sanskrit text, in possession of his aerial vehicle, Salva attacked the city of Dvarika, raining down mighty weapons that resemble lightning. According to the narration in the epic, he possessed an aircraft known as the Vimya and used it for air travel and for aerial warfare. Large parts of the city were destroyed in the attack until the god Krishna responded by firing weapons at this spacecraft. The weapons in the ancient text are described as arrows, but not ordinary arrows. It is said that once fired, the arrows roared like thunder and resembled bolts of lightning or rays of the sun. Also, the legend says that Krishna eventually departed Earth and the ocean consumed his city of Dvarika. Up until a few decades, the city of Dvarika was thought to exist only in mythology. However, now that experts have actually discovered evidence of such a city existing near modern-day Dwarka, history changes, and with it the understanding and interpretation of ancient texts such as the Mahabharata. Underwater archaeologists have recovered a number of ancient artifacts in the Gulf of Cambay, including construction material, pottery, sections of walls, beads, sculptures and human bones, all which have been found to be at least 9,500 years old. The vast city, which is 5 miles long and 2 miles wide, is believed to predate the oldest known remains in the subcontinent by more than 5,000 years. The site was discovered by chance last year by oceanographers from India's National Institute of Ocean Technology, who were conducting a survey of pollution. Experts believe that the area where the ancient city existed was submerged by melting ice caps and the end of the last ice age some 10,000 years ago, even though they existed in a human body. They can be known only through their words in the Vedas. They left nothing else. They left no chronicles of their achievements or images that might have survived the course of time. The 7 sages appear in different corners of the world. The ancient history of the Saptarishi goes far back in time, so it is difficult to gain more knowledge about these extraordinary divine individuals. So one could easily dismiss their existence as pure myth, but they also appear in different parts of the world under different names. The 7 sages can be found worldwide and are mentioned in myths and legends of Egypt, Babylon, Sumer, China, ancient Greece and India. The Saptarishi had the same mission as the seven Apollo, who were antediluvian demigods and sages created by the god Enki. The similarities between ancient myths told by civilizations who had nothing in common and were separated by thousands of miles seems to indicate that the seven sages were more important to the human race than we realise. I spoke with My Patriot Supply the other day, and we were discussing how people prepared in 2010 through to 2016 versus today. How many of you stopped preparing because Obama left the White House, as if everything we were preparing for had to do with Obama or Hillary? I am here to tell you that you are wrong, dead wrong. Look at the deep state, for example. Look at how the other side is willing to destroy our nation's due process, privacy and laws just to get power back. And what do you think will happen if they succeed? We prepare because we understand that the threats we face are way bigger than just a singular thing. Because of this fact, I've partnered with My Patriot Supply and think you should too. Right now, save $70 on a 2-week food kit with guaranteed 2-day delivery at preparewithOOWK.com. This offer won't last, but here's the good news, My Patriot Supply will. Don't think you can afford to prepare. They have payment plans and options to fit any budget, so don't wait, get ahead of the chaos today. PreparewithOOWK.com. Hyperborea is the mythical land of the people beyond the north wind in Greek mythology. It is mentioned by the Greek historian Herodotus, home to white swans and lined with popular trees that would weep amber. At one point it had been blessed with an eternal spring, resulting in double harvests of grain per year, with most of the countryside covered in forests called the Garden of Apollo. When it was destroyed by ice, its people were believed to have migrated to lands in the south. According to the Greek legend, the land of Hyperborea is a place of perfection, with sunlight 24 hours a day. The people will never suffer from disease or old age, nor did they have to labour or fight in any wars. Hyperborea is believed to have been far north of Thrace, and in modern times that would have seemed to have been located within the Arctic Circle, but the actual location of Hyperborea is a mystery. However, according to the Greek poet Pindar, the road to Hyperborea could not be found by land or sea. But Russian scientists believe they have found the location of the mysterious continent using paleomagnetic analysis. According to the research, the continent, which now mostly exists as underwater shelf, came together twice in Earth's history. First as part of a supercontinent 750 million years ago, then by part of the Pangaea continent, which existed around 335 million years ago. Following the dissolution of Pangaea and the creation of the Arctic Ocean, Hyperborea was spread along the northern pole, mostly becoming the Arctic shelf. According to ancient Greek texts, Hyperborea was a mythical civilization similar to Shambhala and Atlantis, and the people possessed secret knowledge and were close to the gods, like Apollo. H.P. Blavatsky believed Hyperborea to be the polar origins of mankind. It was believed that Hyperborea was the golden age, polar centre of civilization and mankind. From King Arthur's Avalon to Plato's Atlantis, people have long dreamed of magical islands where the miraculous happens and the lost find sanctuary. The Celts of Ireland were no different, and in their tradition, the mythical island was known as Hy Brasil. Could this ancient mythical island of Hy Brasil be a portal for otherworldly beings, or is it the description of Hollow Earth? Hy Brasil is very similar to the lost city of Atlantis, the key difference is being that Hy Brasil actually has many first-person accounts written about it. In addition, many of these accounts cause Hy Brasil to be even more mysterious than Atlantis. Hy Brasil is a phantom island said to lie in the Atlantic Ocean west of Ireland. Irish myth describes it as cloaked in a mist, except for one day every 7 years, when it becomes visible but still cannot be reached. Stories about the island have circulated throughout Europe for centuries, with tales that it was the promised land of saints or a paradise where an advanced civilization lived. In Irish tradition, it is thought to come from the Irish U Brasil, meaning descendants. Nautical charts identified an island called Brasail, west of Ireland in the Atlantic Ocean, as far back as 1325. In a Portoland chart by Angelino Dulcert. Later it appeared as the Insula di Brasil in the Venetian map of Andrea Bianco, 1436. A Catalan chart of about 1480 labels 2 islands, Ilha de Brasil, one to the southwest of Ireland, where the mythical place was supposed to be, and one south of Ilha Verde, or Greenland. In 1480, John Jay departed from Bristol, England, on a journey to find the fabled island, only to come back empty-handed after spending 2 months at sea in 1481. In 1481, 2 more ships, the Trinity and the George, departed from Bristol on an expedition to find Hy Brasil, with no success either. Interestingly, in 1497, Spanish diplomat Pedro de Valle reported to the Catholic monarchs of Spain that John Cabot, the first European to visit North America since the Vikings, had discovered in the past by the men from Bristol who found Brazil. This implied someone from one of the Bristol expeditions had actually managed to find it. In 1674, a captain, John Nisbet, claimed to have seen the island when on a journey from France to Ireland. He is said to have sent a party of 4 ashore, where the sailors spent the entire day on the island. There they claimed to have met a wise old man who provided them with gold and silver. Strangely, the captain said the island was inhabited by large black rabbits and a mysterious magician who lived in a large stone castle by himself. A follow-up expedition was led by Captain Alexander Johnson, who also claimed to have found Hy Brasil, confirming Nisbet's findings. In the following years, Hy Brasil would be forgotten about, as attempts to find it failed again. Map markers started leaving it off most nautical charts. When it was last observed on a map in 1865, it was simply noted as Brasil Rock. The last documented sighting of Hy Brasil was made in 1872 by Robert O'Flaherty and T.J. Westrop. Westrop claimed to have visited the island on 3 previous occasions and was so captivated by it that he brought his family with him to see it in person. There, they all witnessed it appear out of nowhere, only to see it vanish again before their very eyes. Hy Brasil has also been identified in various 20th century publications, one of the more recent being Graham Hancock's book Underworld, The Mysterious Origins of Civilization. Great Island, a similar west of Ireland place, is in Irish myths, of which are believed to have influenced the Vikings. Great Island, also known as White Man's Land, and in Latin, Iberia Major and Albania, was a land said by various Norsemen to be located near Vinland. In one report in the Saga of Eric the Red, described the people in what was supposedly White Man's Land to have been dressed in white garments, uttered loud cries, bore long poles, and wore fringes. Another report identifies it with the Albani people, with hair and skin as white as snow. Celtic folklore tells of a mythical land across the Western Ocean, often referred to as the Celtic Otherworld, and also known as Avalon, among other names. The Byzantine scholar Procopius of Caesarea described the Otherworld of the ancient Gauls and said it was located west of Britain. Plutarch, in a chapter from the Moralia called Concerning the Face which appears in the orb of the moon, describes a land called Ogygia that was 5 days' sail from Britain, and that the Celtic natives also knew of 3 other lands equal distance from Ogygia, and from each other in the direction of the setting sun, including a great continent and land of Cronus, and from the ancient era until the early Christian historical era, geographers referred to the waters beyond Iceland as the Cronian Sea. Homer talks of the island of Ogygia, and it lies far out at sea, 5 days' sail from Britain, going westward. Irish documents called Imrama from the 6th and 7th centuries supposedly record the adventures of Irish priests in the Western Ocean, while other folklore stories tell of an Atlantic voyage of those like Saint Brendan and King Arthur, often considered mythical. Gerardus Mercator refers to Jacob Canoin, who had learned that 8 men returned to Norway from an expedition to the Arctic Islands in 1364, in a letter to John Dee in 1577, stating specifically that the 8 men who came to Norway in 1364 were not survivors of a recent expedition, but descended from the colonists who had settled the distant lands several generations earlier, and claimed to be the descendants of King Arthur's expedition. Tech Duin is a mythological island to the west of Ireland, where souls go after death. In Irish mythology, Don, the Dark One, from Proto-Celtic, is an ancestor of the Gaels, and is believed to have been the god of the dead. Don is said to dwell in Tech Duin, the House of Don, or the House of the Dark One. A 9th century poem says that Don's dying wish was that all his descendants would gather at Tech Duin after death. The 10th century tale, Fingin's Vigil, says that Tech Duin is where the souls of the dead gather. In their translation, Anne Dooley and Harry Rowe commented that to go to the House of Don in Irish tradition means to die. This suggests that the pagan Gaels saw Don as their ancient ancestor and believed they would go to his abode when they died. Tech Duin may have been thought of as a place where the souls of the dead gathered before travelling to the final destination in the other world, or before being reincarnated. According to Julius Caesar, the Gauls claimed descent from a god of the underworld. Both Saint Berind and Saint Brendan found the island on their respective voyages, and returned home with nearly identical descriptions of High Brazil, which they dubbed the Promised Land. The Christian writers who put together the Liber Gabala Arena made Don one of the Milesians, the mythical ancestors of the Gaels. The Milesians invade Ireland and take it from the Tuatha De Danann. During the invasion, Uru, one of the goddesses of Ireland, drowns in a shipwreck off the southwest coast. Don is then buried on a rocky island which becomes known as Tech Duin. In the literature, Tech Duin is said to lie or beyond the western edge of Ireland. Tech Duin is commonly identified with Bull Rock, an islet off the western tip. Bull Rock resembles a portal tomb as it has a natural tunnel through it, allowing the sea to pass under it as if through a portal. In Ireland, there was a belief that the souls of the dead departed westward over the sea with the setting sun. In one of the most famous UFO encounters ever, known as the Rendlesham Forest Incident, a strange craft is reported to have landed outside a US military base in the UK. Sergeant Jim Penniston claims to have touched this craft and telepathically received 16 pages of binary code into his mind. He wrote down the code the next day and had it translated decades later. The code was said to list very specific coordinates of High Brazil and listed the location where the ancient cartographers had it mapped. The message also listed the coordinates of several other ancient sites around the world, such as the Pyramids of Giza and the Nazca Lines. At the very bottom of the message, the coordinates of High Brazil were listed again, along with an origin year of 8100.
In 1980, one of the most well-documented UFO encounters ever occurred in Rendlesham Forest near the RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge complex in England, an installation operated by both the United States and English military.
When we arrived to the suspected crash site, it quickly became apparent that we were not dealing with a plane crash, or for that matter, anything else we've ever responded to. There was a bright light emanating from an object on the forest floor. As we approached it on foot, a silhouetted triangular craft about 9 feet long, 6.5 feet high, came into view. The craft was fully intact and sitting in a small clearing just inside the woods. As the three of us got closer to the craft, we started experiencing radio difficulties. I then asked Airman Kabansak to relay the radio transmissions back to our control center, act as a relay. Burroughs and I proceeded towards the craft. When we came up on the triangular-shaped craft, there were blue and yellow lights swirling around the exterior as though they were part of the surface. The air around us was electrically charged, and we could feel it on our clothes, our skin, and our hair. Nothing in my training prepared me for what I was witnessing. After 10 minutes without any apparent aggression, I determined the craft was non-hostile to my team and to the base. Following the security protocols, we completed a thorough on-site investigation. This included a full physical examination of the craft, which included photographs and my notebook entries that I had at the time, and relays with the radio through Airman Kabansak to our control center. Those were required. On one side of the craft, there were symbols that measured 3 inches high, and they're approximately about 2.5 feet long. These symbols were pictorial in design. The largest symbol was a triangle and was centered in the middle of the others. These symbols were etched in the surface of the craft, which was warm to the touch. Even though it looked like black onyx, it felt like metal. The feeling I had during the encounter was like no type of aircraft that I've ever seen before. It was in the Jane's Book of Known Aircraft or anything I've seen since. After roughly about 45 minutes, the light from the craft began to intensify. Burroughs and I then took a defensive position away from the craft as it lifted off the ground without any noise or air disturbance. It maneuvered through the trees and shot off at an unbelievable rate of speed. It was gone in a blink of an eye. In my logbook that I have right here, I wrote, "Speed, impossible." That night, over 80 Air Force personnel, all trained observers assigned to the 81st Security Police Squadron, witnessed the takeoff. The information acquired during that investigation was reported through my military channels. The team and witnesses were told to treat the investigation as top secret, and no further discussion would be allowed. The photographs that we retrieved from the base lab, 2 rolls of 35 millimeter, of course, were apparently overexposed. Thank you.
On July the 7th, 1878, the inhabitants of the Irish seaside town of Ballycotton in County Cork were both surprised and astounded by the sudden appearance of an island that had not been seen in the ocean before. Sightseers gathered and were able to see the new island quite plainly, and were able to make out its coastline, woodlands, fields and very deep valleys. A large number of County Cork fishermen set out in boats to investigate, but as they approached, the entire island disappeared out of existence, leaving them amazed and wondering. Hy Brasil shares a lot in common with the tale of Atlantis and other lost cities, but I believe it's most similar to the stories of Agartha and Shambhala. The name Hy Brasil finds its origins in the name Brasil, the High King of the world in Celtic mythology. Strangely enough, the legend of Shambhala also tells of a golden city hidden where the King of the world sits on his golden throne. It's very interesting that two different cultures, worlds apart, would share such a similar mythology. Is Hy Brasil still out there? No documented sightings have occurred since 1872, and although researchers have found areas of land that may have once been mistaken for an island, it does not seem to exist, not in any way that we can see it, that is. If it does, however, appear once every 7 years, then that means it should have appeared in 2012 and will again appear in 2019. So if you happen to find yourself on the west coast of Ireland, keep your eyes open. You may be surprised. In Babylonian mythology, Urkula was from the underworld, from which there was no return. There were two traditions explaining how humans had entered the Netherworld. According to one of them, the road to the Netherworld passed through the steppe land that was swarming with demons, and across the Kuba River, and then through 7 heavily guarded gates. Another version described the road to the Netherworld crossed by boat down one of the rivers of the upper earth and across the Apsu, the sweet waters under the earth, to Urkula, the lower earth. At first, the only ruler of Urkula was Ereshkigal, the queen of the Great Below, a granddaughter of Enlil and older sister of Inanna. She ruled the Netherworld with her husband Nergal, the king of death, who brings disease, plague, and all misfortunes caused by heat. Urkula was host to many demons, including the hideous child devourer Lamashtu, the fearsome wind demon, and protector god Pazuzu, and great demons Galas, who dragged mortals to Urkula. On the basis of various texts, it can be assumed that the Babylonians located the entrance to the underground world, where the sun set in the western desert. The Babylonian sun god, Shamash, descended to these regions. The entrance was supposed to be at the grave of the deceased. In the Babylonian writings, the grave was the entrance to the underground world. The Babylonian myths were inspired by the Sumerian beliefs and later repeated and further developed. The Netherworld was described as a dreary place. To the gloomy house, seat of the Netherworld, to the house which no one leaves who enters, to the road whose journey has no return, to the house whose entrance are bereft of light, where dust is their subsistence and clay their food. They see no light, but dwell in darkness. They are clothed like birds, in wings for garments, and dust has gathered on the door and bolt. In the myth, after crossing the Huber River, the deceased, naked or clothed in feathers like birds, stood in front of the 7 city walls, and had to pass through 7 gates. The ruler would pronounce them dead, and their names would be recorded on a tablet by a scribe. In the Hellenistic era, the Greek god Hermes was combined with the Egyptian god Thoth, which gave rise to the cult of Hermes Trismegistus. So who was the mysterious Hermes Trismegistus? Hermes Trismegistus influenced many ancient thinkers. He was credited with producing tens of thousands of writing that contained profound knowledge about the universe, nature of time, and creation of humankind, incarnation of the soul, and many other subjects that later became very interesting, especially to secret societies. According to Plato, there were secret halls containing 9,000-year-old historical records in the Temple of Neith at the city of Sais, Egypt. The history of Sais goes back to Egypt's pre-dynastic times, prior to 3100 BC, but the only visible ruins are not older than the 11th century. Mr. Trismegistus was undoubtedly a fascinating individual, who was considered by some a contemporary of Moses and a forerunner of Christ. Still, it is very difficult to say with certainty who he really was. According to some sources, Hermes Trismegistus lived before the flood, and after inventing hieroglyphics, inscribed his wisdom on them to preserve it from destruction. After the flood, his wisdom was translated into Greek and transcribed into books. Many people say Hermes Trismegistus walked with the gods, and he passed his divine wisdom to mankind. It is also said that he advised the god Osiris. People consider him not a god like Thoth or Hermes, but a prophet. Students of esoteric knowledge have always been fascinated with the teachings of Hermes. The mysterious Emerald Tablet is of special interest. The Emerald Tablet is an ancient artifact, of which the original source is unknown. The tablet is part of the Hermetica, and is one of the most revered magical documents in Western occultism. It reveals a profound spiritual technology. It has survived to this day despite many efforts to suppress it. The tablet's true origin is lost in ancient legends that go back more than 10,000 years. One such legend says that the artifact was discovered in a cave tomb, clutched in the hands of the corpse of Hermes Trismegistus. Many Hermetic texts were lost during the Middle Ages, but some were rediscovered in the Byzantine copies. During the Renaissance, wisdom of Hermes Trismegistus was revived again, and Hermetic texts became very popular in Italy. In the book, The Secret History of Hermes Trismegistus, it says there was a fundamental agreement among the various traditions of intellectual history, which included the Greek philosophy of Plato and Aristotle, the Judeo-Christian tradition of the Bible, and the esoteric traditions of the Kabbalah, Hermeticism, and Arab philosophy. Here are some things that Hermes Trismegistus taught people. Wherever there is life, there is soul. Wherever there is soul, there is mind. Everything moved is corporeal. Everything moving is incorporeal. The soul is in the body. The mind is in the soul. The world is in the mind. And the father of these is God. God exists around all and through all things. The mind exists around the soul around the air around matter. Nothing in the world is devoid of life. Nothing in the universe can suffer death or destruction. Life is everywhere. Providence is everywhere. Immortality is everywhere. God announces the future to man in 6 ways: through dreams, portents, birds, intestines, spirit, and sibyl. What is true is not perturbed, not determined, not coloured, not fashioned, not agitated, but is naked, transparent, comprehensible through itself, intransmutably good, and fully incorporeal. Within each thing there exist 10 punishers: ignorance, sorrow, inconsistency, greed, injustice, lustfulness, envy, fraud, anger, and malice. A profound contemplator will see the 10 punishers, of which the preceding conclusion spoke, according to Mercury, correspond to the evil order of 10 in the Kabbalah and its leaders. of whom I have proposed nothing in my Kabbalistic conclusion, because it is secret. The knowledge of Hermes Trismegistus spread across Europe. It was a time when many scientists and philosophers were interested in alchemy, and many alchemy symbols were based on the knowledge found in Hermetica. Many secret ancient societies, such as for example the Rosicrucians, studied the teachings of Hermes Trismegistus, because it was believed his wisdom opened the doorway to the ultimate truth. These ancient secrets were closely guarded by the mystery schools, whose initiates had taken the oath of secrecy, punishable by death. The divine knowledge of Hermes Trismegistus has been preserved for the future generations and is accessible to the general public. In Irish mythology, we come across a number of stories about shape-shifting beings. These shapeshifters are often gods, goddesses, magicians, witches, fairies, and other supernatural creatures. In ancient times, they believed it was possible to transform humans into animals by using magic. One of the most intriguing personalities in Irish mythology is Fintan Mac Brocra, who is said to be the first man in Ireland. His story includes his relationship to the granddaughter of the biblical Noah, the story how he escaped the Great Flood and travelled to the Land of Destiny, meaning Ireland. According to the Book of Invasions, also called the Book of Conquest, Fintan Mac Brocra, also known as the Wise, was a seer who was married to Lady Caesar. When Caesar was a young girl, only 10 years, an Egyptian priest warned her of a coming catastrophe. He told her to gather a group of women and try to escape. Caesar built 3 arks and filled them with women who all possessed different skills. Her father came along with 2 other men. In the poem, Fintan describes how he survived the flood when all others perished by hiding in the hill in Town Finney over the River Shannon. They sailed for 7 years before they reached Ireland. It was the year 2361 BC, according to the annals of the 4 masters, but only 1 ship had survived the epic journey. Among the survivors was Fintan Mac Brocra. Upon arrival to Ireland, the women were divided into 3 groups. Each of the groups took 1 of the men to populate the new country. They also divided up the sheep they had brought with them. That's the story of how the first sheep reached Ireland. Lady Caesar was together with Fintan Mac Brocra, and in time she became a great warrior. As I've mentioned before, shapeshifters are mentioned in many ancient Irish myths and legends, and the story of Fintan Mac Brocra is no exception. As in many Irish myths and legends, Fintan is credited with shape-shifting abilities. According to the ancient tales, he could transform himself into a one-eyed salmon, an eagle, and a hawk. It was said he lived for 5,000 years before he left the realm of humans. The story of the flood can be found among all ancient cultures. His great age made him a very wise man. He saw historical events of old Ireland, and he used his knowledge to advise the kings of Ireland. It was not until the advent of St. Patrick and Christianity in Ireland that Fintan departed this mortal realm. In the Celtic lore, the Fomorians are described as terrifying giant creatures, horribly deformed and often mistaken for demons. It is said that this race is descended from Noah's son Ham. The Fomorians were superstitious and tyrannical. People conquered by them were either enslaved or was forced to pay a crippling tribute of 2/3 of all children and cattle born. They were said to have come from the sea or under its surface, and they were some of the earliest inhabitants of the British Isles, both Scotland and Ireland. Their terrifying armies would raid from the sea. The king of the Fomorians was Balor, a giant with an eye in the middle of his forehead, and according to the tradition, they conquered the first invaders of Ireland. 30 years later came the Nemeds, who, like those who settled Ireland before him, had genealogy going back to the biblical Noah. Nemeds managed to win 4 battles with the Fomorians, but after 9 years, Nemed and thousands of his people died of a plague. The Fomorians were again victorious until the Furbolgs, the third group of invaders, arrived and subdued the Fomorians. The Furbolgs, the men of bags or sacks, a name given to them during their Greek exile. The Furbolgs managed to live peacefully with the Fomorians, who decided to give them Ireland, but their hostility against the Tuatha De Danann remained forever. The Tuatha De Danann defeated the Irish giants and forged a ceasefire with the Fomorians. This attempt failed due to the treachery from one side. That resulted in a terrible war between the two races that ended in the Fomorians' downfall. The Orkney Islands are situated in the North Sea. Once settled by the Norse, they left a unique and fascinating folklore and tradition that has much in common with Scandinavia. Among them are tales from fishermen of mythical creatures emerging from the waters during sea voyages. There are stories about a mythological race of dark sorcerers known as the Finn folk. Unique to Orkney and Shetland, these strong and athletic amphibious sea people have always been feared by mortals. They were shapeshifters with unequal boating skills. The Finn folk could step out of the water onto land as they choose, and live easily between the two worlds. Benevolent and threatening, they could punish seamen with terrible storms. On some occasions they stole humans and brought them to their hidden island homes, where the abducted individuals were forced to remain for the rest of their lives. Except for their daughters, who were mermaids, the Finn folk were fully humanoids, but their bodies were draped with fish-like fins. They had a majestic city of unknown location, but it is usually said to be at the bottom of the sea. To the ancient Celts, nature and animals were sacred and must be treated with respect. The spiritual world was invisible, but there were gateways leading from the material into the spiritual world. The physical world was believed to be much more complex than we can even imagine. The Celtic Tree of Life served as a portal to invisible worlds and was a source to sacred knowledge guarded by the most enlightened ones. The Celts had a special relationship to nature and believed that animals, plants and trees possessed a spiritual essence. Under certain circumstances, it was possible for humans to establish contact from other invisible realms. The belief in a tree of life is universal, and though the myths vary from culture to culture, some elements always remain almost identical. The Celtic Tree of Life is often depicted showing the branches reaching skyward and roots spreading out into the earth below, symbolising the Druid belief in a link between heaven and earth. People will be familiar with the eternal sacred tree of life in Norse mythology. Civilization of Mesoamerica believed in the Cyber tree, that it was powerful. The Aztec and Mayan civilizations also considered this tree sacred. The Kalpa tree, often mentioned in Sanskrit literature, the Celtic Tree of Life is connected to the world of the spirits. Oak was considered the most sacred tree, but they thought every tree had magical properties. Trees were connected to the world of the spirits and their ancestors, and were doorways into other worlds. Celts believed that wise people, such as druids, could communicate with the other world. The Celtic druids were seen as intermediaries between gods and men, as teachers, judges and doctors. The druids, who were priests in ancient Celtic religion, possessed the wisdom of the oak. This sacred knowledge had been handed down through the generations. Thousands of years ago, a godlike race known as the Tuatha De Danann came to Ireland. They brought with them 4 magical treasures that are mentioned in early Irish literature. These treasures include the Stone of Destiny, the Invincible Spear, the Shining Sword, and the Cauldron of Dagda. The Tuatha De Danann are said to have come to Ireland from the north of Europe. They are represented as large, strong and beautiful beings that mingled with mortals and yet remained superior to them. They were believed to be a race of gods or demigods with supernatural powers, human traits and personalities, and a large variety of skills in arts, crafts, music, language, love and war. There were also druids among these people. In the Annals of the Four Masters, also known as the Annals of the Kingdom of Ireland, describe medieval Irish history and were compiled by monks. The story of the Tuatha De Danann, a mythical race of godlike beings with supernatural abilities, is told in these chronicles. They came to Ireland in the mist or cloud across the sea. Their principal residences were a district along the River Boyne near Leinster, one of the provinces situated in the east of Ireland, and the fairy mound of Femin in Tipperary, in the southwestern part of the country. Each member of the Tuatha De Danann has a special significance, skill or capacity, and these sources showed them to be immortal. Prominent members of the Tuatha include Dagda, a chief god associated with fertility, Morrigan, a goddess of war and fate, Nuada, the first king of the Tuatha De Danann. Angus was associated with beauty and love, Brigid, a fiery goddess of poetry, and finally Craden, a god of metalworking, who worked with brass and bronze and forged the weapons which the Tuatha De Danann used to battle the Fomorians. The Fomorians are also a supernatural race in Irish mythology. They are often portrayed as hostile and monstrous beings who come from the sea or underground. Later, they were portrayed as giants and sea raiders. They are enemies of Ireland's first settlers and opponents of the Tuatha De Danann. However, their relationship is complex and some of their members intermarry and have children. The Fomorians have thus been linked to the Jotnar of Norse mythology, so the Fomorians seem to be like the Anunnaki, have been gods who represent the harmful or destructive powers of nature, darkness and death, blight and drought, whereas the Tuatha De Danann, in contrast, seem to represent the gods of growth and civilization, like the Pleiadians. The Book of the Taking of Ireland is a collection of poems and prose narratives that purports to be the history of Ireland and the Irish from the creation of the world to the Middle Ages. There are a number of versions, the earliest of which was compiled by an anonymous writer in the 11th century. It tells of Ireland being settled or taken 6 times by 6 groups of people, the first being the people of Cessair, the second the people of Partalon, the third the people of Nemd, the fourth the Firbolg, the fifth the Tuatha De Danann, and finally the Milesians. The first 4 groups were wiped out or forced to abandon the island. The 5th group represent Ireland's pagan gods, while the final group represent the Irish people, the Gaels. It is said that during many years the Tuatha De Danann ruled Ireland in peace until the invasion of the Milesians, a tribe of people. The Book of Invasions says that the Milesians are the last mythical invaders of Ireland and are the true Gaelic people that arrived on Ireland's shores. The Tuatha De Danann tried to fight the invaders. They even created a magical storm in an attempt to drive them away. However, a Milesian poet calmed the sea with his invocation, and then his people landed. The Milesians are Gaels who set sail to Ireland from Hispania after spending hundreds of years travelling the earth. After their confrontation with the Tuatha De Danann, the 2 groups agree to divide Ireland between them. The Milesians take the world above, while the Tuatha De Danann take the world below, i.e. the other world. Also, the fairy people of Irish folklore are said to live beneath the hills and are often identified as the remnants of the ancient fabulous race of the Tuatha De Danann. So have any of you noticed that the Malaysians sound exactly like the Scottish? So this is how the Scottish and Irish are related. They both came from Spain to conquer Ireland and Scotland. The Liber Gabala, which was written in the 11th century AD by Christian monks, purports to be the history of Ireland and the Irish. It tells us that all mankind is descended from Adam through the sons of Noah, and that a Scythian king named Phineas Farsaid, a descendant of Noah's son, is the forebearer of the Gaels. Phineas, a prince of Scythia, is described as one of the 72 chieftains who built the Tower of Babel. His son Nel wed Scota, daughter of an Egyptian pharaoh, and they have a son named Godelb Glass. Godelb crafts the Gaelic language from the original 72 languages that arose after the confusion of tongues. The Gaels leave Egypt at the same time as the Israelites and settle in Scythia. After some time, they leave Scythia and spend 440 years wandering the earth, undergoing a series of trials and tribulations akin to those of the Israelites, who spent 40 years wandering in the wilderness. Eventually, they reach Hispania by sea and conquer it. There, Godel's descendant, Breagan, founds a city called Brigantia and builds a tower from the top of which his son glimpses Ireland. Brigantia refers to Corona in modern-day Galicia in Spain, and the tower is likely based on the Tower of Hercules, which was built at Corona by the Romans. In ancient times, a new culture suddenly exploded across the vast terrain of Asia, Europe and Africa. They supplanted the early agrarian, nature-worshipping culture that had featured the earth goddess and her son, the Green Man. When the new culture arrived, the Green Man acquired horns and became the devil, and the Pleiades acquired the association with a bull and became part of the zodiacal sign of the bull sun, Taurus. A new, complete culture known as the bull cult had emerged, also known as the pre-Shivite culture in India. The origins of Shaivism is unclear and is a debate among scholars, but some trace back their origins to the Indus Valley civilization. This new cult quickly became a universal religion and succeeded in uniting the Asian, Europe and African peoples known as the Greeks, Celts, Anatolians and Egyptians. In all those countries during the bull cult, the Pleiades was said to be the goddess that transcended. In India, they associate the Pleiades with Murugan Kartikeya, the fiery celestial warrior. Murugan's Greek counterpart, Dionysus, was also intimately associated with the Seven Sisters. Dionysus's followers on earth honoured their deity as the manifestation of the bull sun. His bull cult lineage had arrived on Crete via Anatolia. Crucified Dionysus with the Seven Sisters, the Pleiades above his head. The association with the bull and the Pleiades was also known amongst Yazidis of northern Iraq. Their autumn festival was when the Pleiades was directly overhead in the night sky. Another reason they honoured the appearance of the Seven Sisters with special rites at this time was because it was also the court of their primary deity, the Peacock Angel, which also had association with the Seven Sisters and the bull sun. Billy Mayer claimed that he was contacted by the Pleiadians over 130 times. These contacts occurred between 1976 and 1982, with Billy meeting with his Pleiadian contact multiple times, even though he was initially contacted telepathically. Billy has gone on to write a handful of books on the subject and has been at the centre of controversy for years. According to the Pleiadian history on Earth, the last Pleiadian leader to leave Earth was in 10 AD and went by the name of Gabriel. Apparently, the reason the Pleiadians left Earth is to give people the chance to evolve down their own path. However, they did leave one Pleiadian leader behind, an entity by the name of Jumanuel. This Jumanuel was a powerful spiritual leader that possessed a soul that had evolved far greater beyond that of humans. Jumanuel was a son of Gabriel, and his mother was called Mary. Some people believe this to be the true origin of Jesus. Legend tells that the Pleiadians will soon return to Earth to aid humans on their spiritual path, possibly at the time of a major crisis. Gabriel in the Abrahamic religions is an archangel. He was first described in the Hebrew Bible and was subsequently adopted by other religions. In the Hebrew Bible, Gabriel appears to the prophet Daniel to explain his visions. The archangel also appears in the book of Enoch. Gabriel is described as the archangel of Israel, defending his people against the angels of other nations. Many Christian traditions, including Anglicanism, Eastern Orthodoxy, and Roman Catholicism, revere Gabriel as a saint. In the book of Ezekiel, Gabriel is thought to be the angel that was sent to destroy Jerusalem. According to the Jewish Encyclopedia, the Archangel Gabriel takes the form of a man and stands at the left hand of God. Islam holds Gabriel as an archangel sent by God to various prophets, among them Muhammad. The Latter-day Saints hold that the angel Gabriel is the same person as Noah in his mortal ministry. The intertestamental period, roughly 200 BC to 50 AD, produced a wealth of literature, much of it having an apocalyptic orientation. The names of angels and demons were greatly expanded, and each had particular duties and statements before God. In the book of Enoch it reads, Gabriel saw much blood being spilt upon the earth, and heard the souls of men cry, bring our cause amongst the Most High. In Enoch 10:1, the reply came from the Most High, the Holy and Great One, that sent forth agents, including Gabriel. And the Lord said to Gabriel, proceed against the bastards and the reprobates, and against the children of fornication, and destroy the children of the watchers amongst men. Send them one against each other, so that they may destroy each other. Gabriel is one of the 5 angels that keep watch, one of the holy angels who is over paradise and the cherubim and the serpents. The story of Gabriel blowing a trumpet blast to indicate the Lord's return to earth is very familiar. After the rapture starts, the wrath of God, in which away the earth is totally cleansed of any human or demonic opposition to the government of God. This wrath of God is initiated when the 7th seal is opened and the 7 trumpets of Revelation are sounded. Revelation 8:2 states, and I saw the 7 angels that stand before God, and 7 trumpets were given to them. Revelation 8:6. And the 7 angels, who have the 7 trumpets, prepared themselves to sound them. The first 4 trumpet sounds bring destruction upon the earth, but the last 3 are called woes. This is similar to the time of Noah's flood. Earth is destroyed by the 7 trumpet blasts. After the 7 trumpets of Revelation, there are 7 bowls of wrath, which are the consummation. God curses the unrepentant people with more plagues. When the 7th bowl of wrath is poured, Satan influences the world leaders and their armies to gather at Megiddo for the battle of Armageddon, to fight Christ and his saints. Revelation 19:19. But the devil is no match for Christ and his armies. The leopard beast and his false prophet were thrown into the lake of fire. Revelation 19:20. Satan is chained for 1,000 years and the new millennium begins. In Latter-day Saints theology, Gabriel is thought to have lived a mortal life as the prophet Noah. The two are regarded as the same individual, Noah being his mortal name and Gabriel being his heavenly name. Gabriel is one of the primary archangels and is the angel of revelation in Islam. Muhammad saw Gabriel in his full angelic splendour only twice, the first time being when he received his first revelation. As the Bible portrays Gabriel as a celestial messenger, so do other religions. Gabriel was sent to numerous people. He is known by many names in Islam, such as Keeper of Holiness and Peacock of Paradise. Gabriel also questions Muhammad on the core tenets of Islam. Contrary to Christian tradition, Islamic traditions depict Gabriel as the warring angel, very similar to how Gabriel is portrayed in Judaism. Gabriel is sent to destroy the people who God wants annihilated. Angels are described as pure spirits. The lack of a defined form allows artists wide latitude in depicting them. Byzantine iconography always portrays them as light hair, light eyes and light skin. The Yazidis of Iraq consider Gabriel one of the 7 mysteries, the heptad to which God entrusted the world, and sometimes identified with Melek Taus. Melek Taus, also spelled Malik Taus, translated in English as Peacock Angel, is one of the central figures of Yazidi religion. In Yazidi creation stories, God created the world and entrusted it to 7 holy beings, often known as angels. The Yazidi Book of Revelation, a text generally believed to be written by non-Yazidis, along with the Yazidi Black Book, is purported to contain the words of Tayyuz Melek. The Yazidi consider Tayyuz Melek an emanation of God and a good benevolent angel and leader of the archangels, and is entrusted to take care of the world after he passed the test and created the cosmos from the cosmic egg. They believe he's not a source of evil. He is not a fallen or disgraced angel, but an emanation of God himself. The Kayt Basil Book of Illuminations, which claims to be the words of Tayyuz Melek himself, states, "I was present when Adam was living in paradise, and also when Nimrod threw Abraham in the fire. I was present when God said to me, 'You are the ruler and God on earth.' God, the compassionate, gave me 7 earths and throne of the heaven." Yazidi accounts of creation differ from Judaism, Christianity and Islam. They believe that God first created Tayyuz Melek from his own illumination, and the other 6 archangels were created later. God ordered Tayyuz Melek not to bow to other beings. Then God created the other archangels and ordered them to bring him dust from the earth and build the body of Adam. Then God gave life to Adam from his own breath and instructed all archangels to bow to Adam. All the archangels obeyed, apart from Tayyuz Melek. In answer to God, Tayyuz Melek replied, "How can I submit to another being? I am from your illumination, while Adam is made from dust." Then God praised him and made him the leader of all angels and deputy on earth. About 10 AD, the last Pleiadian leader, called Pledges, left Earth because Pleiadians finally achieved peace back home. They thought it was time for humans to evolve on their own. But before leaving Earth, the Pleiadians left a spiritual leader called Jemanuel, who later became known as Jesus. Jemanuel was a very evolved soul, whose father was Gabriel of the Pleiades system and Mary of Lyran descent. Earth continued to evolve on its own without direct Pleiadian leadership until our present time. In the very near future, as Earth reaches the photon belt, the Pleiadians are going to help bring all humans on Earth into the light. The name Pleiades and Pleiadians is becoming well known among humans on Earth. In January 2014, Forbes released an article saying that Iran says tall white space aliens control America. The article cites the famous whistleblower Edward Snowden leaked documents. Bruce Fenton, author and guest on the famous science program The Unexplained Files, and esteemed researcher Stephen Strong reveal several mysterious ancient sites that are located in Australia. They lead an exhaustive research for evidence to support the claims made by local indigenous populations. Supported by numerous photos and images, we are introduced to the incredible physical evidence having a lost civilization that once existed in Australia, one that held advanced knowledge and technology. This civilization proclaimed themselves to be from an out of this world origin, one in the direction of the so-called Seven Sisters, or the Pleiades. Interestingly, long before the current ideas of ancient astronauts, H.P. Lovecraft set the Pleiades as the home of his fictional characters, the Great Old Ones. H.P. Lovecraft created a number of deities throughout the course of his literary career, such as the Great Old Ones and the Elder Things. An ongoing theme in Lovecraft's work is the complete irrelevance mankind has in the face of horrors that apparently exist in the universe, with Lovecraft constantly referring to the Great Old Ones, a loose pantheon of ancient powerful gods who were from space and once ruled Earth. In Lovecraft's stories, the benevolent deity is called Nodens, or Lord of the Great Abyss, also referred to as Nuada of the Silver Hand. He is based on the Celtic deity Nodens, associated with healing, the sea and hunting. He was worshipped in ancient Britain, most notably at a temple park near Gloucestershire, and also was worshipped in Gaul. He has been equated with the Roman gods Mars and Silvanus, and his name is cognate with the Irish mythological figure Nuada. In Irish mythology, Nuada, known by Silverhand, was the first king of the Tuatha De Danann. He is thought to have been a god and is related to the British and Gaulish god Nodens. He is also associated with hunting and fishing. Nuada was king of the Tuatha De Danann for 7 years before they came to Ireland. They made contact with the Firbolg, the then inhabitants of the island, and Nuada sought from them half of the island, which their king rejected. Both peoples made ready for war, but in an act of chivalry, allowed their arms and numbers to be inspected by the opposing side, to allow for a truly fair battle. During this first great battle, Nuada lost an arm in combat with the Firbolg champion Sveg. But Nuada's ally, Enkeba of Norway, then fought Sven. 50 of Nuada's soldiers carried him from the field, and the Tuatha gained the upper hand in the battle, and the Tuatha were victorious. The Tuatha then decided to offer the Firbolgs 1/4 of Ireland instead of the 1/2 offered before the battle, and he chose Connacht. The Fomorians were mythological enemies of the Tuatha De Danann and the people of Ireland, often equated with the mythological opposing force such as the Greek Titans to the Olympians. The second battle of Mad Tuireag, Nuada was killed and beheaded by Balor. Nuada's name is also cognate with that of a Welsh figure, Ludlor Iraint, or Lud of the Silver Hand. The Norse god Tyr is also another deity equated with Mars, who also lost a hand. Sabazios is another Indo-European deity associated with a sacred hand. The legendary British king Lud may therefore ultimately be derived from Nodens, traditionally associated with the city of London. The Fisher King of Arthurian legend is therefore proposed as a survival of this deity. The Tuatha are said to have retreated into the fairy mounds, cloaking their presence by raising the fairy mist. The Tuatha De Danann can be linked to the same origin as the gods in Greek mythology. Hesiod calls the Greek gods the Golden Race. In Irish mythology, Ireland was subject to 6 invasions. The first 5 were from otherworldly beings, and the last was from Milesians. The Tuatha was known to come from the heavens. This information had been passed down from Dispater, the god of the underworld. These stories stayed in the oral tradition because the Irish had not been invaded, like the surrounding countries. In conjunction, the Druidic schools wanted to contain the stories in verbal form. This kept the stories in circulation to the culture and public.
This story is the one I sort of mentioned earlier in the show that I kept having to look back up and go, am I really reading Forbes right now? Is this really Forbes, or am I reading The Onion? Am I reading a joke website? But no, this is the story from Forbes.com. Iran says that tall, white, space aliens control America. Documents leaked by NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden conclusively prove that the United States has been ruled by a race of tall, white space aliens.
So today we're going to talk about the epic legends of classical Greece and Rome, and I'm going to explain to you how they're talking about the ancient war that we've talked about many times on this channel. So just describing the same battle as Ragnarok, the Amarna tablets. So let's get into it. The legends of Greece and Rome appear to have been based on genuine historical figures and actual events. These classical heroes are flesh and blood characters from our ancestral past. We will uncover the Indo-European origins of the mysterious Hyksos. A Pelasgian princess from mainland Greece is identified with one of Egypt's greatest queens. Agamemnon's Trojan War is set in its proper archaeological context. Homer's Iliad is finally given an epic historical setting. The Pelasgians were the ancestral people of all European peoples. They lived mostly in the North Aegean, and they preserved a common non-Greek language. The Greeks used the name to describe the original pre-Greek inhabitants of Greece and the Aegean area, with whom they sometimes included the Etruscans. See, the ancient Greeks were called Pelasgians, and I connect this with the Pleiadians of the star cluster, the Seven Sisters. So in my eyes, that these were the ancient gods, these were the ancient astronauts, if you like, that was battling the Anunnaki, which were the Egyptians. In the Pleiadian creation myth, it talks about the goddess of all things. She spontaneously generates the serpent who mates with her. She lays the cosmic egg and bids the serpent to incubate it by coiling 7 times around it until it splits in two and hatches all things that exist. In the soil of Arcadia, the Pleiadians would spring up from the serpent's teeth, scattered under the heel of the goddess of all things, who kicked the serpent from their home on Mount Olympus. So is Mount Olympus somewhere that's not on this earth? Both being ancient civilizations, the Armenians and Greeks have coexisted for centuries. There are ancient notes by Greek historians suggesting of the roots of Armenians. The earliest reference to Armenia was made by a Greek historian in 525 BC. According to a hypothesis proposed by linguists during the 20th century, the Armenian and Greek languages share a common ancestor. This has led to the proposal of the Greco-Armenian language, postdating the Proto-Indo-European language. Herodotus suggests that the Armenians are descendants of the Phrygians. Plato had earlier noticed the similarities between the Greek and Pleiadian languages. Pleiadian, it just sounds like Pleiadians again. The Armenians' homeland, before their migration, was a valley in Thessaly, after which they are named. A chain of ancient references show a close relation between the two peoples. A team from the Institute of Science of Human History in Germany analysed the DNA of 93 Egyptian mummies dating from approximately 1400 BCE to 400 CE. The evidence for their study reveals a surprisingly close relation to ancient people of the Near East, such as Armenians. Ancient people believed that mankind evolved in Armenia, built a high civilization, but was destroyed by a great flood, after which the remnants spread to all directions. The Holy Bible places the Garden of Eden in Armenia, and the genesis of human races around the Mount Ararat, upon which landed Noah's Ark, but probably the greatest contribution of the Armenian highlanders to mankind has been the creation of alphabetic writing. It was this revolutionary concept of script which was destined to become the foundation for which all ancient and modern alphabets evolved. Prominent scholars agree that the alphabet was invented by the historic Hyksos people during their domination of the Near East between the 18th and 16th centuries before Christ. But who were these enigmatic Hyksos? Around 1900 BC, a group of these Armenian tribesmen burst out of their homeland and carved out a powerful empire encompassing Syria, Palestine and Egypt. Known to the classical Greeks as Hyksos, they ruled over Egypt for 150 years, from 1730 BC until their expulsion by a resurgent Egypt in 1580 BC. The Hyksos introduced the horse and the spoked-wheeled chariot, bronze and Iron Age weapons and hardware, scale armour and war helmet, the composite bow, a complete calendar, and the building of walled cities fortified by moats. They brought to Egypt improved methods of spinning and weaving, new musical instruments, the humpback bull, the olive and the pomegranate trees. As a ruling aristocracy, they supplanted feudalism over the democratic patriarchal system of the Semitic tribes and introduced the one universal sun god. The Hyksos founded Jerusalem, the holy city. The sub-Saharan African genetic influx seems to have only started after the Roman period, which coincides with the advent of monotheism, in particular Islam. Hence why modern Egyptians are more genetically shifted towards African people than the ancient Egyptians. The most typical skeletons of the white race have been found in the Caucasus, after which this race is called Caucasian. This indicates that the Armenian and Georgian mountains of the Caucasus were the birthland of the white race. The first group of Indo-European migrants arrived in the Levant at the beginning of the Middle Bronze Age. Their distinctive houses, graves and personal ornaments indicating an origin in Anatolia. These elite settlers, although a minority, took over the rule of the early Bronze Age cities, especially the coastal ports, and grew wealthy through maritime trade. Eventually their descendants occupied Egypt as the Hyksos, ruling over the local Canaanite population, which arrived at the Avaris in the century following the departure of the Proto-Israelites from that city towards the end of the 13th dynasty. According to Josephus, the Bible Hebrews were in reality the Hyksos, which, as translated by modern Egyptologists, mean foreign kings. Something to note here is the English alphabet is the most similar graphically to the ancient Hebrew alphabet out of all alphabets today, including Jewish square script Hebrew, mainly because the 10 lost tribes of Israel settled in Western nations via Europe after their exile in Assyria. The Hyksos were subdued and were indeed driven out of other parts of Egypt, but were shut up in a place that contained 10,000 acres. This place was named Avaris, which the shepherds built a wall around all this place, which was a large and strong wall, and this in order to keep all their possessions and their prey within the place of strength. But Moses made an attempt to take them by force and by siege, with 480,000 men to lie row-tongue about them. But upon his despair of taking the place of siege, they came to a composition with them, that they should leave Egypt and go without any harm to be done to them. So basically the Hyksos surrendered, They was obviously surrounded by this large army. They surrendered and they come to an agreement that they'd let them go free. That's what this is describing. And obviously the town with a large wall, this is Jerusalem. Apophis, Hyksos king of ancient Egypt, who initially controlled much of Egypt, but was driven back northward to the vicinity of his capital in the Nile River Delta by the successive attacks by the Theban pharaohs. This means that Apophis became king of Egypt in virtually the same year as the Pharaoh eruption in the Aegean, which is dated 1628 BC. We're going to talk more about this Pharaoh eruption. I think this is when the nuclear war happened at the time of this Pharaoh eruption. From this dating, the Hyksos were far from being the ancestors of the biblical Jews. They are way too early, having ruled over 200 years before Abram. Archaeology has revealed that the Hyksos invaded Egypt from Palestine and were composed of various foreign peoples who were not related to the Egyptians, Babylonians or Assyrians. Greek mythology offers the best explanation for the identity of the Hyksos in that they were Greeks and people who dwelled on the Black Sea coast who migrated to Egypt at the time of the abduction of Lau by Zeus, which occurred in about 1675 BC. The Epirus, who are mentioned in Egyptian inscriptions, were characterized as bandits who rode on horses and drove chariots. The historical evidence for a Greek empire, which covered the Mediterranean, lies in the account of the Empire of Atlantis that was given to Solon by the Egyptian priest of Neith shortly before his death in 559 BC, and the account of the abduction of Lau and her marriage to the king of Egypt. This story of Atlantis, later referred to by Plato, quoting Socrates, is as follows. 9,000 years before Solon, the Atlanteans, so called after their first king Atlas, ruled over all of Europe as far as the Pillars of Hercules, including all of Asia Minor, Palestine and Africa, except for Egypt, from their island in the Aegean Sea, known to them as Atlantic. So this describes the Anunnaki, that they controlled the whole of Europe and all of the world really. The Atlanteans were expelled from all of Europe by the Athenians and forced to flee to Egypt. The Athenians' victory did not last long, since shortly afterwards the greatest volcanic eruption in the last 15,000 years destroyed their home, the island of Thera in the Pleiades, and almost wiped out the Proto-Greek civilization in 1628 BC. Egypt then recovered its kingdom. The eruption, I think, was the nuclear war that happened. Putting the dates together, we have a date of between 1695 to 1675 BC for the expulsion of the Atlanteans from Europe, which corresponds to the start of the reign of the Hyksos. The term Atlanteans come from Atlas, their first king. When Solon wrote the account down, he re-Hellenized the name Hyksos to Atlas, as Plato explains in his text. The Atlantean rule over Egypt came to an end in about 1550 BC, give or take 60 years, which corresponds to the reign over Amos, who ruled jointly over Egypt from 1551 BC. This account is also backed up by the Greek king list, which placed the first man at this time Amadin, the father of Car and Lydus, during whose time there was an 18-year-long famine referred to by Herodotus in the first book of his histories. This famine would have been caused by the so-called nuclear winter resulting from the Pharaoh eruption. Prior to this event, all Greek records were assumed to be destroyed. The Hyksos invasion indicates that the inhabitants of Palestine during this period were Europeans, as does the story of Noah, whose flood occurred at the same time as the Pharaoh eruption. According to the biblical account, the son of Noah was an ancestor of all the Greeks and the Thracians. Noah's son Ham was the ancestors of all the Hittites, and Noah's son Shem was the ancestors of all the Lydians, all of whom are European peoples. This European origin has been demonstrated by modern analysts of Y chromosome DNA, which shows that the M172 DNA lineage, which originated in Anatolia, was also the dominant lineage of Minoan Greece, Phoenicia, and after that, the M35 lineage, which originated in Egypt. The DNA lineage of the modern Jew is predominantly M89, the same as that of the Arabs. So let's now consider another candidate for who the Jews were. The goddess Isis appeared in his sleep and blamed him that her temple had been demolished in the war. But the sacred scribe said to him that if he would purge Egypt of the men who had pollutions upon them, he should be no longer troubled with such frightful apparitions. He accordingly chose out 250,000 that were thus diseased and cast them out. Moses, wishing to secure the future of his authority over the nation, gave them a noble form of worship, opposed to all that is practised by other men. In their holy place they have consecrated an image of the animal by whose guidance they found deliverance from their long and thirsty wanderings. But this text by Tacitus, if you read it halfway through, it describes they abstained from swine's flesh in consideration of what they suffered when they were infected by leprosy, to which this animal is liable. So this is why they still don't eat pork, because it reminds them of when they was cast out of Egypt. According to the Bible, when David captured the city of Jerusalem, he expelled all the lepers from it, and all the people who were deformed or diseased. This tallies with the account of Manetho, who says that Avaris was set up by the Egyptians as a leper colony, just prior to the Exodus. Even at the time of Christ, the Bible says Jerusalem was full of lepers and the sick. The whole story about the people being sick and leprous most probably originated as an allegory for the destruction of the people of Avaris being unclean and unlawful, meaning that they were criminals. In the Middle Ages, the people most likely to become lepers were prisoners kept in dungeons. Since the Epirus are described as bandits in Egyptian records, this explains the origin of the Bible story about the Egyptians giving their gold to the so-called Hebrews on the day of the Exodus. In reality, the Epirus stole it. Manetho's account clearly distinguishes the current occupants of Avaris, i.e. the lepers, from the previous occupants, the Hyksos, as separate peoples. The Manetho stele also distinguishes the people of Israel as the Epirus as different peoples, whereas the Bible says that the Hebrews and Israelites were the same people. So was that changed to encompass all these people? Why did they change the story? Located at Point Hope, Alaska, Iputak was once a flourishing city where people lived, traded and practiced unusual rituals. Today there are only ancient ruins and artifacts left, but the site is of great archaeological and historical importance. Unravelling the mysteries of Iputak could help us gain vital knowledge about a vanished culture and the early inhabitants of North America. Unfortunately, this is easier said than done because there is conflicting information about the ancient city of Iputak. The site is estimated to be at least 2,000 years old. The community collapsed around 800 AD, and archaeologists are trying to piece together who built the ancient city and when. The builders of Iputak were sophisticated people and more advanced than Eskimos. Who were they? Where did they come from? And what happened to them? Iputak was discovered during archaeological excavations in 1939 and 1940. It has been labelled as the largest site of its kind in the Eskimo region. Some of the houses have been destroyed by the sea, but there are still enough ruins left to investigate. The ancient city was designed on a grid pattern. Its architecture is very similar to the ancient cities of the Indus Valley. Scientists have discovered about 600 abandoned houses, 1,000 unusual artifacts, and a huge cemetery that raises many interesting questions about the true inhabitants of Iputak. Iputak was built by a fair-haired and blue-eyed race, the Eskimos say. The Iputak are famous for producing sophisticated and decorative carvings in ivory, wood, bone and stone artifacts. The complex and unusual nature of the carved ivory material found at Iputak immediately confirmed the material as unique. Iputak specimens show artisan patterns distinct from those of related cultures. Some archaeologists say the ancient city was constructed by Eskimos, but they deny this. According to the legends of the Eskimos, the ancient city of Iputak was built by a fair-haired and blue-eyed race. Their legends also inform that white giants lived in Iputak up until the War of the Gods. Could Iputak have been a Viking settlement perhaps? One thing's for sure, the inhabitants of Iputak were not primitive. In the city, scientists discovered more than 5,000 graves, and some of them revealed this culture practiced unusual customs, but they also possessed knowledge of more advanced science. Inside the graves, researchers found ancient skulls with artificial eyeballs of ivory inlaid with jet. Some bodies had ivory nose plugs shaped like birds' heads, and others had ivory death masks. Many graves contained small mummified animals, also with eyes inlaid with obsidian. Based on the findings, it seems the inhabitants of Iputak practiced shamanism, and for some archaeologists, the culture may have came from Ukraine. The ancient inhabitants of Iputak left behind valuable clues, but we still cannot know who the original builders were. Perhaps this ancient city was really built by a fair-haired race with blue eyes, as the Eskimos say. But one thing for sure, the city still remains shrouded in mystery. Medieval people imagined that somewhere far away there really was mystical monsters. For example, geographers of Western Europe believe that in the east is a huge territory called the Great Tartar. It is probably there that the River of the Dead originates, and the inhabitants of this country once announced to the whole world about the coming of the end of the world. Where was this mystical land? The Great Tartary is a geographical term used mainly by Western European scholars. From the 12th to 19th century, they place this state in various parts of Asia, from the Urals and Siberia to Mongolia and China. The borders of Tartary were moving from the Caspian Sea to the Pacific Ocean. Other scientists, on the contrary, associate this mysterious country with Turkestan or Mongolia. The origin of Tartary scientists connect with the contamination of two terms at once, ancient Greek Tartarus and the name of the people Tartars. It is believed that the words united in the minds of the inhabitants of Western Europe because of the similarity in sound. The fact is that from the caravans who transported goods from China along the Great Silk Road, the Europeans heard about this mysterious Tartars inhabiting the eastern lands. Since the Chinese almost all people living in north of the Celestial Empire, including Mongols and Yakuts, that were called Tatars. In the west, a notion was formed that Tartary is a huge power that occupies almost all of Asia. In the 13th century, after the raids of the Mongolians, the attitudes towards the Tatars became negative. They began to be perceived as horrific warriors from the east, the hordes of which want to put an end to the existence of Christian civilization. In the religious texts, it was said that the Tatars are savages, ferocious like demons, sent by Satan himself. In addition, according to the ancient Greek mythology, Tartarus is in an abyss that is under the kingdom of Hades, the world of the dead. Because of the similarity of the Tatars with the name of the pagan hell in Western Europe, the opinion was formed that the Great Tartary is a land where different monsters, including the legendary Gog and Magog, live, and people there worship the Antichrist. Many scientists from Western Europe consider Great Tartary a huge empire stretching from the Urals to the Pacific Ocean. For example, an Italian diplomat in his work Universal Relation, dated 1595, wrote that this country used to be called Scythia, and it occupies half of Asia. However, not all scholars were inclined to give the Great Tartary such vast expanses. Some geographers had this country in Central Asia. Thus, the Encyclopaedia Britannica, Volume 3, 1773, indicates that the state of Tartar is south of Siberia, north of India and Persia, and west of China. This view was also shared by a Swedish researcher. In 1730, he published Geographical Description of the Great Tartary, places the state between Mongolia, Siberia and the Caspian Sea. A number of scientists directly associate Tartary with the birthplace of Genghis Khan. The Italian diplomat who visited Mongolia in 1246 left a bizarre description of this country in his work The History of the Mongols, which we call the Tartars. He combined his travel experiences with medieval mystic legends. For example, the author mentioned firecrackers, people with dog heads and cow hooves, and as well as creatures whose legs do not have joints. Some researchers have mentioned in their works that in a huge empire it's so cold that ice is already shallow under the earth. It was from here, as the French traveller of Hungarian descent Franz Tott believed, that the cradle of humanity, in his memoirs on Turks and Tartars, 1784, he wrote that the earliest people migrated from Tartarus to the south and west, populating China, Tibet, India and later Europe. Many Catholic scholars regarded the border between Europe and Asia as a mythical frontier of good and evil. For example, the English explorer John Speed in 1626 presented to the scientific community the new chart of Tartary, compiled by him. In the publication there was an image of the typical resident of this country. He was wearing clothes worn under Ivan the Terrible. Tartarus was associated with the world of the dead, or a country ruled by evil forces. Although on the very first Russian maps you can find this state, which is explained by the influence of the Western European traditions. Thus Tartary got on the draft of Siberia, which was compiled in 1667. I have read a lot about this state, land, Grand Tartary, that existed for a very long period, and the final civil war between the Moscovian Tartary and Western European parts of it. Parts of it happened in 1775 and is known as Pugachevs. So we have a great amount of talk about Great Tartary. It is said it existed for thousands of years until it was destroyed and wiped out from the histories. Remember what Napoleon said, history is a lie, everybody agreed upon. Why would he say such a thing if he did not know it was a simple, nasty fact? So have Russians shared the same territory with Mongols? Yes, and the Mongols also were absorbed into the Russian culture, hence why today many people in Russia look Mongol, because that's part of their ancestry. So Tartary existed, but it was at the same time shared by the Russian Empire. More precisely, this empire just conquered over the lands of the Tatars. So was Tartary, was it under Russia? Like the hollow earth theory, was this mirrored on the other side of the earth? Or was this just underneath, like a cavern system? Or was it on the surface and just wiped from history? Subaru is a Japanese word for Pleiades, and the company logo, an oval with 6 4-point stars, represents the Pleiades star cluster. In Cherokee legends, they teach that Native Americans originated long ago in the Pleiades, and that indigenous people are on Earth as star seeds, with a mission of bringing light and knowledge. The Navajo call the Pleiadian star cluster the sparkling suns. The Iroquois relate the constellation to happiness. The Lakota people say their ancestors are from the Pleiades. According to myth, the Pleiadians have a distinctive Nordic or Scandinavian appearance, 700-year lifespans. Also going by the name Seven Sisters, the Pleiades are a group of stars in the Taurus constellation. It is the closest star cluster to Earth. When looking at the cluster without magnification, only 6 stars can be seen, but there are 7, and the lost 7th is a common theme in multiple mythologies, including Indonesia, Africa, Australia, Europe, and Native America. In ancient Greek cosmology, the Pleiades were the 7 daughters of the pre-Olympian Titan Atlas. Hermeticism, an esoteric system based on the writings attributed to Hermes Trismegistus. Hermes may have been from Greece or Egypt, but has been referred to as the son of the Nile. He is also believed to be the father of Western astrology and alchemy. His writings are rumoured to have first appeared in the 2nd century AD Rome, and he has always been associated with the Greek god Hermes, as well as the Egyptian Thoth. According to the Hermetic traditions, the 7 stars open seekers to a more refined level of consciousness. Viewed as a school of learning by Hermeticists, only those who have been purified of energetic block teachings come spontaneously during sleep or deep meditation. The Pleiades are also viewed as our solar system's source of electrical energy, from the little sister star, Electra. The Pleiades is also in North, Celtic and Bronze Age mythology. The Nebra sky disk, found in 1999 in Saxony, Germany, portrays a detailed star map of the Pleiades star cluster, dated to 1600 BC. The artifact is the earliest known portrayal of the Pleiades in the West. In Bronze Age Europe, the autumn solstice and winter equinox were associated with grief and mourning. At the solstice, the Pleiades would rise in the east as the sun set in the west, mourning the passing of summer as well as the harvest season. In Scandinavian or Viking cultures, the Pleiades were thought of as Freya's chicks, Freya being the Norse goddess of love, beauty and fertility. For protection, some would paint 7 spots representing the 7 stars on hen houses. Ladybugs were also associated with the cluster because of the 7 spots on their wings. The Pleiades are also in Asian cosmologies. The first astronomical mention of the star cluster was in the Chinese annals of roughly 2350 BC and was referred to as the blossom stars or flower stars. At the tomb of the Hongwu Emperor, founder of the Ming dynasty, when viewed from the air, the tomb complex echoes the arrangement of the visible Pleiades stars. In Japan, The Pleiades relates to the cultural value of harmonious grouping or teamwork, a characteristic of samurai and shogun societies. Hindu mythology tells that the 7 sisters, called Kratika, were married to the Rishis, the 7 sages that made up the stars of the Great Dipper. All lived together happily in the northern sky. Charles Hall is famous for his book series, Millennial Hospitality, but the author is actually a US Air Force personnel and wrote the books to reveal his experiences with the tall white aliens when he was posted at the Nellis Air Force Base at Nevada in the year 1964. Initially, he wrote his experiences under the cover of a science fiction book. Later, he summoned up more courage to reach the mass and confess that the things revealed in his books are actually real and extraterrestrials actually exist. There are many true incidents where credible people have got the opportunity to witness Nordic aliens in front of their eyes. In 1954 in Staffordshire, England, it is believed that Jessie Rosenberg witnessed a unique flying object that was hovering above her house. Jessie described that she was able to see 2 Nordic aliens inside the craft.
I was in the back kitchen of the house preparing myself, just having washed, and I heard this noise. So I slipped on my jumper, I run out, and to my amazement, there, suspended on the top of the roof of this old farm, was this object that I can only describe as a huge Mexican hat. It must have been 15 to 20 yards from where I stood. The people in the spacecraft were just looking out. I could see them from the waist to the top of their heads. They were very beautiful people. They had long golden hair, like the old kings used to wear, turned under.
In 1992 in Sydney, Australia, Peter Curry suddenly got shocked when 2 strange-looking women were kneeling near his bed. After some time, when the 2 unusual-looking women disappeared, he found a blonde strain of hair. After conducting DNA testing, it was concluded that it wasn't human. He also passed a lie detector test. Jordan Maxwell was just 19 years old when he had gone to meet his girlfriend. He was left in shock. Her father told Jordan that he had connection with Nordic aliens. L. Ron Hubbard, a well-known American author and founder of the Church of Scientology, is also one of those people who claim to have had an encounter with Nordic aliens. Jack Parsons, a rocket propulsion researcher and an American rocket engineer, also claimed to have met with Nordic aliens on a desert in the year 1946. Also, Billy Meyer, a Swiss farmer, also had an encounter with Nordic aliens. Ancient cultures achieved a deep understanding of the celestial movement. The Aztecs of Tenochtitlan worshipped the Pleiades and had a sophisticated calendar based upon the idea of a cyclical time. From the astronomically oriented temple built on the apex of the hill, the priests watched as the Pleiades passed the zenith, signalling the salvation of the world. Similar to the Aztecs, who related their new fire ceremony to the Pleiades, the Egyptians observed the reappearance of Sirius in their New Year ceremony. Teotihuacan, or the City of the Gods, is located 30 miles northeast of Mexico City. When the Aztecs found it, they gave it the name Teotihuacan, and it was the place where time began and where the gods were born. The city was accurately laid out on a rectangular grid, and an arrangement of ceremonial buildings bear similarities to a precise scale model of our solar system. Various mythical texts have mentionings about reptilian figures, which were usually hostile towards mankind. Indian epics have mentioning about reptilian demons that could come out of water and destroy villages and cities, and there is no such earthly being that matches the description of these demons. It is evident that these mythical texts spoke about the reptilian aliens. The Aztec god Quetzalcoatl was described as a serpent of wisdom that enlightened mankind with the knowledge before civilizations were built. These gods are described as having reptilian figures and large yellow eyes. The European dragon that's mentioned in various mythological stories. It was obvious that Europeans had encounters with reptilian beings who were hostile. Boreas, the Greek god of the cold north wind, is being described as a winged man with serpents for legs. In various Indian texts and works of literature, one can find the mentioning of a race called the Nagas, who lived in the underworld and established contact with humans. These Nagas are being described to have various physical deformities and several reptilian characteristics, making them sound like ancient reptilians who had their bases underground. Chinese, Korean and Japan mythological texts also have mentioning about dragons that bear reptilian features and were believed to live under the water. African folklore mentions about a race of reptilians that were supposedly controlling the earth thousands of years ago. This reptilian race is known as the Chaituri and was thought to have educated native Africans to mine gold for them. There are also some statues and artifacts from ancient Sumerian civilization that looks like reptilian humanoids. These statues have large bulging eyes and reptilian features. The Kappa, a Japanese reptilian alien, one of the three largest and most important Mayan city-states next to Guatemala was Calakmul, city of the two adjacent pyramids. The ruins of this once powerful Mayan city-state was discovered in the 1930s. Calakmul is one of the finest representations of the Mayan culture. In the days of splendour, this city was ruled by the dynasty of serpents. Today it is an ancient Mayan archaeological site located 22 miles from Guatemalan border, surrounded by the jungle in Mexico. The city probably had a population of 50,000 people and was the seat of the Snake Kingdom, of which rulers reigned during most of the Classic period. These rulers identified themselves as divine lords of the snake. Generally, the Mayans did not have expansive military ambitions, but the lords of the snake were rather unique. They was eventually stopped and defeated by the Tikal rulers. In the 1930s, the city was mapped and it was recorded 103 carved stone slabs at the site. It also has a number of very beautiful murals depicting scenes of the Mayan inhabitants giving, receiving and consuming food products, as well as displaying and transporting other goods. The murals are believed to be one of the most unique pieces of art that can be found in the Mayan world. Pleiadian aliens are Nordic-looking type aliens from the star cluster Pleiades in the constellation of Taurus. They have been described by many as humanoid, very tall in stature with light blonde hair and exceptionally fair skin. Theorists have claimed that the Pleiadians and humans share a common ancestor, but no evidence of this has ever been discovered until now. Due to the aliens' exceptionally fair appearance and above average height, the Northern European races, particularly the Scandinavians, have long been hypothesized to be the closest hybrid race of humans and Pleiadian aliens. The recent discovery of the 3,600-year-old nebulous sky disk in Germany, which provides a clear star map to the Pleiades star system, has once again fueled many debates that the Nordics do share a common ancestor with the Pleiadians. Why would they have a detailed star map of the Pleiades? How did DNA testing recently find out about the Pleiadians and humans having a common ancestor? Modern DNA technology has been able to trace the ancestry of all humans through DNA testing. All humans share common DNA markers or traits that allow geneticists to trace your ethnic groups. Even if you are one pure nationality, you will have some overlapping DNA markers of other ethnic groups to varying degrees. After all, we are all humans, or are we? Haplogroups relate to our deep ancestry. Deep ancestry is not traditional genealogy. It is not for tracing family or confirming family linkages. Deep ancestry is a look at our ancient ancestral roots from tens of thousands of years ago, and shows how all people living today are connected to an ancient ancestor who lived in Africa over 100,000 years ago. The World Geneographic Project has been testing haplogroups worldwide, and until recently has had no cause for alarm, until it was discovered that between 4,000 and 6,000 years ago, a small group of extremely unusual DNA was introduced into the population of Denmark. Geneticists have named it Haplogroup 1 and have no idea where it came from. It only appears in the Nordic races and to small degrees in countries that have been invaded by the Nordics, such as England and Ireland. No other group of people on the planet have this DNA unless they have come in contact with Nordic people. It is the root cause for the Nordic appearance. All other Europeans and most humans have R, R1A or R1B haplogroups. It is suggested that Nordic people have alien ancestors. They do have a large amount of distinctive DNA that is without explanation and is not found anywhere else. They resemble Pleiadian aliens and appear to have been hybridized by the advanced Pleiadian aliens in our ancient past. Other Nordic anomalies. They can tolerate extreme climates that other humans cannot. Exceptionally physical people often display great strength. They look completely different than any other Europeans. 95% atheists and have no belief in a god system. Extremely intelligent, scientific, were able to sail around the globe using the stars as guides from memory. Unable to be directly exposed to our Earth's sun without burning, suggesting they did not evolve on Earth. Around 200 years ago, Sir Edmund Halley discovered an anomaly in space around the stars of the Pleiades. 100 years later, Frederick Wilhelm Bessel confirmed Halley's findings. In 1961, Paul Otto Hess defined and measured this anomaly. It's an energy ring of incredible size, 760,000 billion miles wide, and is due to intersect the Earth just about any minute now. He also calculated that this is a part of a 25,000 year long cycle that our solar system goes through. It's expected that once we're in the photon belt, electricity won't function and there will be 3 to 5 days of total darkness. With the total failure of electricity, public services will fail, communications, telephone, water and power. All indigenous cultures and religions prophesize 3 days of darkness to mark the end times. The photon belt is an immersed region of space which is radiating intense electromagnetic radiation throughout the visible spectrum and beyond into high frequency invisible light, even including some X-ray spectra. It is part of a magnetic flow of light throughout the galaxy. References has already been made through the media to huge increases in intensity of dangerous radiation entering through the holes in the ozone layer in certain regions of our planet. Our solar system journeys through the universe in a 26,200 year cycle, its path crossing what is popularly termed the Milky Way every 13,000 years or so. Therefore, planet Earth comes into a space-time overlap or period of null time, an electromagnetic no zone or energy vacuum with complete absence of electromagnetic fields and the temporary suspension of the planetary grid system. This is when the pendulum reaches the destructive pause at the end of its swing. This cosmic cloud is called the photon belt, the Milky Way or Masonic ring, and ushers in an era of light after a much longer period of darkness. We are now poised to enter this photon belt, and there is nothing we can do to avoid it. It is the ending of a cycle. In the photon belt, electrons are neutralized during this period and therefore the laws of electricity lapse. There will be absolutely no electrical activity during this period, not even from batteries. The effects will be far-reaching. The photon belt's discovery was due to a series of studies of the Pleiades that began in the days of the famous British astronomer Sir Edmund Halley. Halley discovered that at least 3 of the stars in this star group were not in the same position as recorded by the Greeks. The difference was so great that it was impossible that either the Greeks or Halley were wrong. So Halley concluded that the Pleiades moved within a prescribed system of motion. This concept was proven by Frederick Wilhelm Bessel with his discovery that the stars in the Pleiades had a proper motion of 5.5 seconds of arc per century. Jose Comas Solar further speculated that the Pleiades and a number of other stars formed a distinct system and that all apparently had their own planetary systems. Paul Otto Hess also studied this system and discovered a photon belt with a thickness of approximately 2,000 light years. If the results of this observation about the Pleiades are correct, we are poised to enter the belt and pass through the 2,000 light year ring before the end of this century. As we get closer, the planet will become subject to increased seismic activity. We will also see the alteration of traditional weather patterns, severe typhoons, hurricanes and tornadoes. The sun will increase in solar flare activity. Should Earth reach this photon belt before the sun does, the sky will appear to be on fire and there will be 3 days and 3 nights of blinding light. Welder's goggles would be needed to protect eyes from this light, as it would burn out our retinal nerves, and this would continue for 110 to 120 hours. This is a cold light, therefore there would be no heat, but there could be radiation, so everyone should remain indoors. But if the sun reaches the belt first, there will be a similar period of immediate and total darkness without the sun rising.